5.
We can only marvel at the cynicism of Labour's election manifesto, can't we?
4.
We are going to see a pretty punitive budget on the 30th of October, and you can already see it, I think, in terms of hiring has really slowed down in the last couple of months.
3.
The new leader, whichever of the two it is, has got a hell of a job on their hands because they've got to fight a war on 3 fronts. They've got to be an effective opposition. They've got to take on and understand the danger of the Lib Dems, which is real.
2.
Rachel and the black hole, eh?
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Allison Pearson.
Hello?
And me, Liam Halligan. It's another news tsunami, Allison. Labour's first budget shaping up to be pretty tough, to say the least, with Chancellor Rachel Reeves all but admitting a national insurance hike for employers will be in her 30th of October autumn statement, along with other tax rises. And now, just 2 weeks ahead of her budget, the Chancellor says the £22 billion black hole in the public finances that Labour blames on the Tories is actually considerably larger, £40 billion. Which presumably means the UK's tax burden, already at a 70-year high, is set to go up considerably more. But don't worry, because Labour has a plan for growth, and Labour's held an investment summit, so everything's going to be okay. Meanwhile, more and more people are raising the alarm, co-pilot, Planet Normal style, that the UK's energy security is now so precarious we could face 1970s-style blackouts, all very nostalgic for the likes of us, we who brushed our teeth with a flaming candle, not literally, and read under the bedclothes by torchlight. But power outages would be a disaster for the British economy. Could someone please tell Energy Secretary Ed Miliband? But the big news, Allison, and this is huge, is that your campaign to spread the word about Ozempic, Fatty's little helper as you call it, the miracle weight loss serum, has been so successful that Health Secretary Wes Streeting wants to roll out this anti-fat, hunger-suppressing drug across the NHS. But you know what? I'm still going to beat you in our ongoing weight loss competition.
Well, you know our little private argy-bargy.
It's not exactly private because we talk about it on the podcast.
Well, I mean, our personal argy-bargy
there you go.
is actually, this is sort of forming the basis of quite furious debate this week, not least under my column in the Telegraph, because you've got people like me who are saying, look, the country is terrible at preventative medicine. The idea that the government would give weight loss jabs to unemployed people in an attempt to get them back to work. I mean, Liam, we do have 9 million people of working age who are not looking for work, which is so bad it can only provoke incredulous laughter. But anyway, yes, as you said, Wes has come up with a plan to get these people to lose weight and hopefully be fit enough to stagger down to the job centres. So there are people like me who think, yeah, might as well give that a go, because people don't really understand obesity or being overweight, I don't think. I think you get the other lot who are taking the Halligan, the brisk Halligan, just eat less and cycle about more approach.
Willpower.
Yeah, and quite a lot of Telegraph readers are really not very impressed with the idea of giving taxpayers money to couch potatoes who aren't earning anything. I do have sympathy for that, and I do understand what it looks like. Why should people who keep themselves fit and at a healthy weight, why should they be subsidising these millions of people? But the facts are, Liam, it's absolutely, the statistics are absolutely terrifying. I mean, basically, obesity is costing the NHS about 11 billion a year. That's even more than smoking. And about 40% of the current NHS budget, which is already a deafening 180 billion quid, is being spent on preventable health conditions. And that figure is predicted to reach 60% by 2040. So if you could distribute enough of the slimming jabs, Mounjaro, which is what I'm on, to Zapatide, or how you say it, it's called the King Kong of slimming jabs because it's believed to be the most effective on the market, actually eclipsing now Ozempic and Wegovy.
Oh, you're pronouncing it differently now.
I can't say it, but I will say that when all the readers write very angrily, what about the side effects? I did share with them that one side effect I had this week was all of my clothes are now far too big, and I was wandering down the high street and my leggings fell down. So the newly reduced Pearson bottom was very much on public view.
This is a family-friendly show. I'm amazed you've managed to sit in the cockpit all these years. We're not going to have to alter the Planet Normal cockpit, are we?
I know.
We'll have to get you a new spacesuit, though.
But, I mean, the spacesuit is going to be... You're right, I'm going to have to order a new spacesuit.
And you can use your old one as some kind of, you can put it in a museum or something. Or I was going to say you could use it as a tent, but you'd kill me if I said that, so I won't say it.
A marquee, basically, a marquee. Yeah, but so really where we are now is, the old debate, is it the nanny state? Why can't people take personal responsibility? I would just point to the fact that in the States where weight loss drugs are, they're far more advanced and have been taken up more. The States has recently seen obesity declining for the first time. And it is a crisis. A huge proportion of children, 36.6%, Liam, of 10 to 11-year-olds in the UK are either overweight or obese. That's the life expectancy of those kids basically shortened before they've even got out of the starting block. So there's a lot to think about. Do you think it's worth doing? Do you think it's worth Streeting spending this money on it?
Well, putting our little wager aside and our little contest, obviously I'm delighted for you. You're my friend, that this is having a really positive impact on you and your life. I know it does make you feel a lot better. You are more upbeat because of this drug that you've been taking. And how could anyone not want that for their friend or for anyone else? But the journalist in me, aside from the side effects, if I may, which of course are a big part of the public discussion at the moment, there's another aspect of this. Shouldn't we be teaching our kids to eat properly and exercise? I don't accept, as some of the big supporters of Mounjaro say, that, obesity is a function of poverty because the healthy option's always the most expensive option when it comes to food. Something which I heard somebody say on the Today programme this morning. It was unchallenged. No, it isn't. If you go to a chicken shop for dinner, it's a lot more expensive than if you buy some vegetables and boil them. I'm being serious. I don't accept that obesity is because of poverty. I understand completely to my fingertips that it's often linked to poverty and people working, all hours God sends with multiple jobs to make ends meet, particularly if they're a single parent household, usually a single mum. I get all of that. But my concern is, aside from the side effects, which obviously I hope there are none at all beyond the nausea and other minor complications that people are talking about. But aside from all those, I do worry about just trying to address issues by kind of rubbing them out, if you know what I mean, by substituting a real solution, which would be to, eat properly and exercise more, for a kind of synthetic solution. Does that make me sound like a prude?
No, it doesn't. And I think, I've had thousands of comments under the article today talking about where I am with Mounjaro. And people say much the same, get a grip, if you just eat less like me, you'll be fine. No, I can quite...
Get a grip. I just love that phrase, get a grip.
Well, yeah, that's the, pull your socks up, whatever. Absolutely. Look, no, of course. And I think that's right. And I think things started to go wrong in schools when domestic science, which is what I did, was replaced by something called food tech.
Yeah.
I mean, domestic science was absolutely, how to get colour on the plate, girls. Miss Whitaker used to shout at us in sort of 1976, and all your vegetables and whatever. And a lot of kids, Liam, in fact, it's true that in lots of households, 3 generations have never cooked from scratch. In fact, in some households, there's no table, there's no dining table. Everyone sits on the couch and people have the knowledge that you'll have seen from your mum and grandma and so on, all those things that have been passed down. There are homes where people haven't even had the sort of basics. I mean, do you remember when Delia Smith basically brought out how to boil an egg and everyone thought how ridiculous, but she wasn't wrong.
I was more of a Graham Kerr man myself, the Galloping Gourmet. You know, he'd start the show by jumping over a table. Do you remember this daytime telly in 1974, followed by Paint Along with Nancy Kaminsky?
Oh, I don't remember that. I do remember him Oh, no, it wasn't him. It was Keith Floyd who was permanently pissed, wasn't it? Do you remember?
TV executives these days, they have no imagination. Why can't we have permanently pissed chefs on the telly?
Exactly. So I know. We all have sort of Nadia Hussein, don't we? Who's, is entirely sober, but although very good, of course. But yeah, I mean, just coming back to the side effects, first of all, I haven't had little minor constipation, nothing a few prunes weren't sought out. But I noticed there's a real stigma with these weight loss drugs, possibly as there was with Botox when it was first introduced, and, what used to be called plastic surgery and is now called tweakments. And nobody blinks an eyelid if someone has their eyelids lifted in the lunch hour, do they? And I just want to say this because I know lots of listeners will rightly be skeptical. I've been reading some academic papers on Mounjaro and these other drugs which affect the hypothalamus. I think I'm saying that right. The fact is, Liam, this family of drugs could have more impact on medical science than penicillin, right? We are not just talking about a few people, going down a dress size like me, or 2 dress sizes and your leggings falling off.
And counting, 2 dress sizes and counting.
Absolutely. We are talking about drugs which genuinely senior scientists now think are the most astonishing thing they've ever seen. Okay, so they think even without weight loss, these drugs, Mounjaro and others, will protect against cancer, heart disease, which costs the NHS £7.5 billion a year, heart disease, cancer, even Alzheimer's. And this is because they reduce inflammation, which causes metabolic disease. So we're not just looking at something like get off the Doritos.
And the wagon wheels.
And the wagon wheels. I haven't had the wagon wheel for 30 years. We are possibly looking at a potential revolution in medical science. And, we'll be having this argument till the cows come home. But I would bet you even stronger possibility than an Ed Miliband power cut will be that in a decade, these drugs will have been rolled out to a degree we can hardly imagine.
That's very interesting. And I know you're a squirrel of a researcher. You dig really deeply into subjects that you write about. And I've, Planet Normal listeners who have been with us since the beginning will know that, the way you've schooled yourself in many subjects that you've written about in the column and that we've talked about on the podcast. And I sincerely hope you're right about all this. I totally respect anyone that wants to try these drugs, and I sincerely hope that they're successful for the vast majority of people and have no bad side effects that we discover later down the line. It strikes me that the NHS is going to have to make a really big decision, though, about this. And it's so interesting that it's happened so quickly. We've gone from this becoming a kind of urban myth to something which could be rolled out across the 5th biggest economy in the world by the state in just a few months.
Yes, but as I'm trying to say, there are individuals who are using it. I'm paying privately quite a lot, actually, a month, and lots of listeners and readers have got in touch and are already reporting tremendous weight loss. And I think one of the things I tried to write about today was people have issues with food. I certainly do, going back to childhood, quite a difficult childhood I had, and was with an alcoholic father. And it was very much that sweet things were associated with comfort and treats. And I think if I'm ever under stress, then that's my sort of default setting. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's true for lots of people. Those incredibly annoying people who say, I'm so stressed I haven't eaten for 3 days. I mean, that could be...
That's just aggressive, isn't it?
That's just thoughtless.
That's just nasty.
That's just nasty. What do you mean? I've eaten 3 packets of hobnobs when I'm on the deadline. So I'm actually... listen, Liam, I want to be clear about this because I know we're laughing and so on, and I know you are. I absolutely think probably in an ideal world, eating well, exercising, doing exactly as you say, cooking from scratch, good ingredients, all of that would be the ideal. But we are where we are. We have millions of people who are carrying, the average weight of a man in the UK now is 14 stone. The average is 12 stone for a woman. People are hugely heavier than they were in our parents', let alone grandparents' generation. We could talk for hours about why it is.
Yeah.
You and I will remember how little choice there was in our cupboards and fridge when we were kids. You get the odd packet of, salted crisps and so on, but there just wasn't this just absolute torrent of food. And we could also point to the food industry, food manufacturers who stuff perfectly normal. If you bought a cottage pie in one of the supermarkets, a young mum struggling with the children, just wanting to buy something decent for dinner.
Yeah.
What's in that? Hydrolyzed fat, sugars, absolute rubbish, So there's an awful lot of people trying to feed their families. We've got more families in the UK where two parents are in full-time work than in any other country, all right?
I totally understand. Diet is often, people are time starved. And we've talked about that a lot on Planet Normal.
Yeah.
And I totally respect those choices and how difficult they are for many people. How difficult they were, in my family when we were raising our kids. And I totally get the stress thing too. It seems a bit po-faced of us to say, journalists, we have a really stressful life. We do have a stressful life. Writing a column to deadline is a really stressful thing, but it has nothing to the stresses that some people face. A concern I have is that you rightly talk about the food processing industry, which of course is an enormously influential lobby. I just don't want us to get into some kind of drugs arms race where the food processing, where big food is pumping what we eat with drugs and ingredients that make us fatter, and then big pharma is pumping us full of drugs that make us thinner. That's the concern I have.
Actually, every so often, obviously, we have wonderful listeners, and Deirdre came up with a great image, actually, because she was taking Mounjaro on my recommendation, and she said it's like training wheels, like the stabilizers on a bike when you're a kid.
Yeah.
This is what I'm hoping. This is what a lot of people are hoping. Is you're training yourself now. I'm eating in a particular way, extremely disciplined, high protein, no rubbish at all.
And you look fantastic, I must say. You look better for it and you're happier for it.
Yeah, well, they're going to be at the Festival Ideas on the weekend. We're going to have to issue magnifying glasses to be able to spot the co-pilot.
But as you are getting smaller, co-pilot, the black hole is getting bigger. How's that for a transition?
Rachel and the black hole.
It was 22 billion, the black hole that Rachel Reeves says she discovered on taking office, left by the Tories, even though the IFS, no less, said it was clear for anyone who dared to look. And that is a direct quote. But this is now quite serious. The tax rises that the UK economy may face. And I'm not talking so much, a bit of extra income tax on changes to thresholds. And I'm not talking about the wealthy having to pay more so much as I'm talking about the impact on companies. So that will then stymie hiring. It will stymie growth, the very growth that we really need in order to improve and strengthen and make sustainable our public finances. For me, it's growth that fixes the public finances and prudence with spending rather than tax rises that stymie the growth. That's the problem I have. And I think we are going to see a pretty punitive budget on the 30th of October. And you can already see it, I think, in terms of hiring has really, really slowed down in the last couple of months in anticipation of this budget. You've got people from the hospitality industry seriously saying they're on very tight margins, and to raise national insurance for employers is going to lead to fewer jobs, is going to lead to lower investment. As Rachel Reeves herself admitted,
yes.
When the Tories raised national insurance by 1p, also breaking a manifesto commitment. Labour would say a tax on employers isn't a tax on workers, so they're not breaking a manifesto commitment. But Rachel Reeves in opposition was very articulate when she attacked the Tories with some attitude for precisely this measure.
Well, let's just look at this. There's a video you might be able to find online. You know what? One of the great things, I mean, there's a lot of things to be said against social media, but it's just for gotcha moments of hypocrisy. It's absolutely matchless.
Here's something you said on telly 4 years ago.
There's Rachel in 2021 in the Commons, warning that rises to employers' national insurance will make each new recruit more expensive and increase the cost to business. This decision to saddle employers with job taxes takes money out of people's pockets when our economic recovery is not yet established and only adds to the pressure on poor businesses. You know, these tax rises are only hitting businesses harder. Do you know what, Liam? We can only marvel at the cynicism of Labour's election manifesto, can't we? Clearly, the plan was always, I think, to put up taxes for higher public spending. And we've actually just this morning, we're recording obviously on Wednesday afternoon, and Robert Jenrick, one of the finalists in the Tory leadership race, gave a speech this morning, Wednesday, and when he said that public sector productivity is lower today than it was in 1997. And this bunch of clowns in Downing Street are going to penalise the productive private sector to give more money to this sector, which hasn't improved since 1997. And as you said, you know, that not just this plan to increase employers' contributions to national insurance. I did think it was quite bold of Rachel to designate people with businesses as not working people, didn't you?
Yeah. Given that 2/3 of people are employed in this country by small businesses that are often started by families and run by families, working extremely hard. Thank you very much.
I still remember, this is when Jeremy Hunt was the Chancellor, and we got a fantastic and very moving email from a businessman in the Northwest who was clearly really struggling. And he said when he heard Jeremy Hunt talk about putting up, you know, national insurance for employers, he said he nearly threw his laptop through the television. And he said the increases that the Tories had slapped on business were costing him £225,000 a year, that his business, which had just come out of COVID and all the borrowing they'd had to do to get through that, which he simply didn't have. And we should also mention, Liam, that Big Ange, our Deputy Prime Minister, and Lou Haig, she of the public sector pink hair.
It's got more pink since she entered the cabinet, hasn't it? It was less pink in opposition. She seems to have pinked herself up even more, celebrating Labour's victory.
I'm surprised she hasn't got a nose ring. I suppose that will come soon. But this pair had decided it's also a great time to extend employees' rights. So not only do we have businesses, can I just pay tribute to my co-pilot? Because I was writing all this in a fury in my column, and I suddenly thought I wouldn't have known how to write this piece if I hadn't been learning at the knee of a great economist. But these women, these Labour ministers, extending employees' rights. So basically, fresh-faced recruits to a company are going to be entitled to the same terms and conditions as experienced members of staff. Well, you know, you having taught me, Liam, you know, who's going to take a chance on a new young person when they're going to have the same rights as experienced members of staff from day one? And all this, to me, is pointing to bad news for younger people who companies just simply won't take on.
I agree with you about employee rights, Allison. I do think it's all to play for. I think there may be some opt-outs that new recruits can take in order to ease these new requirements on firms that are taking them on. But I would say there's a general sense here that the economy really needs to grow. And I would say, and this is reflecting many conversations I've had, that across financial markets, they're now watching very, very closely these new borrowing numbers that have come out. And the danger is that Labour's tax rises, made in the name of fiscal prudence, many of which are actually pretty ideological and may not raise the money that they're meant to raise, they are now causing concern among investors, however many investment summits Labour wants to hold. This week's Planet Normal's stowaway is former tabloid newspaper editor and political strategist Andy Coulson. Born in Billericay, Coulson started out on local papers and rose quickly, working for The Sun, the Daily Mail, before becoming editor of the News of the World in his mid-30s, a post he held from 2003 to 2007. Later that year, Coulson was appointed Director of Communications for then Conservative opposition leader David Cameron, before entering Number 10 as Director of Communications when Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010. But in July 2014, after an 8-month trial during which he pleaded not guilty, Coulson was sentenced to 18 months in jail for conspiracy to hack mobile phones, that is, unlawfully intercept private communications. 3 other ex-News of the World journalists also received custodial sentences, along with another freelance private investigator. Coulson was later put on trial for perjury in a Scottish court too, charges of which he was fully acquitted. Released after 5 months in prison, Coulson established a successful communications consultancy, and he remains a sought-after advisor to a host of companies and individuals on political, commercial and other strategic issues. I started by asking Andy Coulson how he felt when, back in 2014, he received his custodial sentence.
So I was expecting it, and then when the sentence came, I was as prepared as I suppose you can be. And I'd obviously spent a bit of time as a sort of journalist by trade. I'd done my research. I'd spoken to a fair few people who'd been to prison. I tried to kind of prepare myself as best I could. And then the sort of down into the cells moment, and the Old Bailey where I was on trial and where I was sentenced is a court that's straight out of central casting, if I can put it that way. You're down in handcuffs down into that old sort of Victorian holding cells, and spent the rest of the day. I was sentenced quite early in the morning, and I had to wait until the end of the day, which is the system, before you get put on a bus and then carted off to Belmarsh. So yeah, I certainly wouldn't rate it as one of the best days of my life, that's for sure. But actually as a process, I thought it was pretty well managed. The people that I met down in those cells were in terms of the staff, were incredibly civilized, were very nice to me when they didn't have to be. And although the whole thing was unpleasant, it was also to an extent, again, partly because I'm a journalist, it was quite fascinating in a way as well. There are moments of it that I was properly interested in.
You were a bright state school educated boy from Essex. You made your way up through local papers. You became editor of the News of the World at a pretty young age in 2003. You're a family man with 3 kids. You must have felt as if the bottom was falling out of your world.
Well, I did, but again, it was a very long process. So that moment that I've just described actually wasn't kind of even the end for me in a way, because I knew that at least that night, once I arrived in Belmarsh, I spoke to my wife and we were waiting to see what would happen with a different situation that was developing in Scotland. And the sort of consensus was that having been convicted in England, I would not be then tried in Scotland. But that turned out not to be the case. And so my first call from prison actually was with Eloise, and she explained that the lawyers had explained to her that actually Scotland was going to happen. So I knew that I would be coming out of prison and going straight into another trial with potentially much more serious consequences. And I was acquitted in that process the following year. So most people who go into prison know where the door is, if you like. It's at least the beginning of the end. Not everybody, but a lot of people. I certainly didn't have that. But what I did have is an awful lot of time to sort of prepare, if you like, and get my head in the right place. And I left Downing Street in 2011, January 2011. I set up a business in the interim, and then things went properly wrong in the sort of summer of 2011. So I had from then really to sort of accept what was happening to me, which was a proper unraveling of my life, and to try to come to terms with it, which is the single most important thing when you find yourself in that kind of situation, and then to accept what I had control of and what I didn't have control of. And that's been the sort of central pillar, if you like, on which I have kind of managed myself. Once I worked that out, and it took me quite a while, it took me about a year, I was then able to sort of move on in a much more constructive way, understanding that ultimately I was now in a process that I didn't have control of, obviously, because it's a jury trial and that's the system that we have. You don't have control over that. You only have control over what you say, do, and most importantly, how you feel about it all. So once I'd worked all that out, Actually, we got through. It was not something that I would wish on anybody because it was a proper unraveling. And of course, the most difficult thing is that certainly the most difficult thing for me was not the end of kind of my career, if you like, or my second career. Having already lost the newspaper career, I've now lost a career as a sort of political advisor. That wasn't the most important thing for me. The most important thing for me was the way that it was impacting my family's lives and how it might impact my son's lives, both in the moment and going forward. And together with Eloise, largely thanks to Eloise, it has to be said, we've managed to get through that pretty well. And we're many years down the road now. I'm about to celebrate is the wrong word, but I'm about to mark 10 years since I came out of prison. So I then got on and with the business of building a business and trying to see if I could put my experience, the good and the bad, to good use.
You have not only built a very successful strategic communications business, obviously your contacts across the world of politics, the media, as a former tabloid newspaper editor, are almost matchless. You've also, if I may say so, launched a very, very successful podcast, which I've been gorging on in preparation for this chat with you, Andy. It's called Crisis What Crisis. Newspaper people like us know that was the famous headline from the late 70s, ahead of the winter of discontent. It's a headline that I remember reading as a child on the front of the Sun paper. That's the name of your podcast. And you interview people, some of them very prominent people, about disasters in their lives and how they've responded to them. Your interview with Dylan Jones, somebody I've worked for, of course, the long-standing and highly successful editor of GQ. Your interview with Craig McKinley, now known as the Bionic MP, as it were. Of course, he's out of the Commons, but Craig McKinley, the Thanet Tory MP, who lost all 4 limbs when he got sepsis. Your astonishing interview with your fellow, as he said, former prison lag, former Belmarsh inmate, Jonathan Aitken, the former Tory cabinet minister. Incredibly moving and insightful. Courtney Laws, the former England rugby captain, as well as prominent politicians like Michael Gove, William Hague, Sajid Javid, and others. Well worth a listen. What has it meant to you launching and building that podcast? You've now done dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews with people discussing how you pick yourself up when you are on the floor.
Almost 100 interviews now we've done, actually, over the course of the last 4 years. And it means a tremendous amount to me. I mean, when I was in Belmarsh, and I spent 2 months of my 5 months in prison in Belmarsh, I was told I'd be there for the weekend, but it turned out to be 2 months before I moved on to an open prison. I spent an awful lot of time. It was a pretty dysfunctional period for Belmarsh. They were between governors and the sort of system had broken, essentially. And so it being Belmarsh, which was a high security prison, their priority, not unreasonably, it has to be said, was security. And so we spent an awful lot of time kind of behind the door, locked away for 22, 23 hours a day. And then you get out, get some food, maybe a quick walk around the yard. And so I had an awful lot of time to think. And one of my thoughts, and I spent a little bit of time on it, actually, just to kill some time writing it up and thinking about it, was around this idea of creating positive content, not entertainment. You get a sort of battered portable that you rent when you're in prison so you can watch a bit of telly. I watch more Homes Under the Hammer than is healthy for any human being, I can tell. But I got thinking that actually, surely there's a way here of getting some useful content in front of these lads who are just locked away, staring out of a window. I sort of worked that up. I didn't go so far as to get to Crisis What Crisis. I didn't get so far as to get to that idea. But once I'd come through my dramas, I revisited that kind of idea, and that's when and podcasting was sort of just emerging then. And then during COVID, I thought, well, I've now got the time actually to do this, as we all did. I saved all my time on the train, and I thought, well, that will disappear in the daytime telly if I'm not careful. So I started the pod as a hobby. I just sort of got a few mates on and started chatting. Jeremy Bowen was our first guest. It was amazing. And we sort of chatted about, he's had a life of crisis, right? From a number of different angles. An amazing man with an amazing career. And I just loved it. You know, I mean, it definitely scratches the journalistic itch for me. But more importantly, it sort of became, and it's an old adage, I know, but it sort of became a nice platform for the very simple idea that if you put 10 people in a circle and you ask them all to chuck their troubles in the middle, chances are you'll want to go home with your own. Chances are. And that is essentially what the pod is, right? It's a sharing of other people's difficulties so that you can learn from it and get perspective from it, maybe extract a little bit of gratitude from it, maybe get some useful lessons.
The podcast ends each episode with a sort of summary of what the person you're interviewing has learned. And I must say, as I found that middle-aged man myself, I found that really useful. And it wouldn't surprise me if I ended up listening to all your episodes over the next few weeks and months.
That's very generous of you. But, it is all obviously down to, I had a few bumps in the road in my life. They are nothing as compared to the vast majority, possibly even all of the guests that I've had on my podcast. And that is, I've got to be honest, it's just been fundamentally helpful for me, right? Just from a perspective point of view, apart from anything else. And there are common lessons, regardless of what the cause of your crisis is. There are common lessons to be extracted. So you don't need even to have been going through a crisis to get a bit of value.
And there's a little bit of news about your podcast, isn't there, in terms of access to prisoners?
Yes, I've now, a deal that I thought that I'd never do, Liam, a deal with the Ministry of Justice, who have now taken our pod very kindly and have made it available to prisoners. So that positive content thing that I was kind of running through my mind when I was in prison has now, through a pretty circuitous route, ended up with the pod being made available via something that's called Launchpad, which is being rolled out across the prison estate, that will allow prisoners to listen to it, which is just fantastic. I'm so pleased that's happened. It's a lovely positive to have come out of a fairly negative period of my life.
Let's talk about today. You were David Cameron's Director of Communications, very famously in Downing Street. You are well known as a very serious political analyst with really astonishing contacts across all the main parties. You're not now a professional political journalist. Of course, you're doing your strategy business and so on. But what's running through your mind when you see Starmer's government, the first 100 days, lots of chaos? As somebody who's been there in the trenches, albeit under another flag, as it were, what do you think the atmosphere is like at the moment in Downing Street?
Well, I have a number of reasons, but it's possibly linked to the first half of our conversation, not to necessarily be the most instinctively sympathetic person when it comes to Keir Starmer. I do have a bit of sympathy for them because there is a truth about politics. Unless you're in the room, you don't really know what's going on. Unless you're part of the decision-making, you can't really sit in judgment. And unless you've got a full grip of the kind of which is what Downing Street is, a train that's rattling along in a fairly random way, quite often, then you never really know the full story. So I don't much like advisors who dive in to criticise. I certainly didn't like it when I was in the job, that's for sure. But that said, in the spirit of constructive criticism, I suppose, what we've discovered is perhaps that they didn't, as a unit, as a team, perhaps spend as much time as they should have done thinking through those first 100 days, and whether that's from a policy point of view or whether that is from an organisational point of view, from an ops point of view, which is very important in Downing Street, and that's the bit that I was very involved in. It seems some of the problems that have been kind of urging over the course of the last few weeks were entirely predictable, and it strikes me that there perhaps wasn't enough time just sort of sitting, thinking, working through some of that difficult stuff. Number one, and number two. I'm not the first former Downing Street advisor to say this, but the gap between getting in at number 10 and getting on with the budget has been a long one. And budgets are a real test of obviously a test of your, kind of policy thinking of where you want to send the country, what direction you want to send the country in. But they are also a real test, possibly one of the biggest tests of your operational resilience. And we're about to see, and there's already the beginnings of some leaks, perhaps they're intentional, who knows, around national insurance. But the test for them now is, can they actually get to a budget in a way that is competent and professional? Can they then deliver that budget, never mind its content, in a way that is competent and professional and reassuring, because God knows we need a bit of that. And can they then deal with that really interesting, difficult 5 days that follows a budget when when every bit of it is being poured over and ripped apart and analysed? Now, one might think that they're going to have it easier than most, because of course our opposition at the moment are too busy on other issues, and it's the opposition that obviously provide the main focus for the criticism or the analysis of the budget, and they're not going to have that. But I'm not so sure. I think they may be in for a rough ride with this budget, but it will be a real test of every part of the machinery.
I was a lobby correspondent back in the day, as you may remember, for the Financial Times at the zenith of New Labour, the change from the fag end of the major government to Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and of course Alistair Campbell, who I clashed with quite a lot. But I've often said on Planet Normal over the last couple of years, looking at the Tories and now again at Labour in Downing Street, Alistair Campbell, controversial figure, but he was a grown-up and he really understood the news. You, with all huge respect, are quite a controversial figure, but you really understand the news, a grown-up. I don't see any grown-ups in Downing Street, and I haven't for a while, when it comes to understanding political strategy. Do you think Labour need to get some really serious people in there?
Well, you always want serious people, and I don't know they're slightly reshaped as it is now team.
Which itself is a problem if you don't know much about them, and I don't know much about them, given our interest.
Well, maybe. I'm not sure. I agree with that. I mean, I failed in this task epically, both as an editor and indeed as a Downing Street communications director. I didn't want a profile in either of those jobs particularly. Less so, I suppose, in the first one where you've got to have a profile or a degree as a newspaper editor. But in Downing Street, I tried really hard not to have a profile and failed, obviously, in an epic fashion for all the wrong reasons. I like an advisor who, bluntly doesn't stroll down Downing Street, wearing a pair of Beats headphones, who doesn't draw attention to themselves with constant here I am briefings, who doesn't end up in a position where they have to hold a press conference, about themselves in the garden. It's, for me, actually, I quite like a period of having anonymous advisors. I think it might be quite a good thing. Now, they've got to be competent and they've got to be able and they've got to be focused and they've got to be patriotic, in my view. But I don't need them to have a profile. I don't need to know who they are particularly, I don't think. I want to be reassured that there are grown-ups in the room and grown-ups with.
I agree with you completely about you don't need a public profile, but frankly, you and I are professional observers of politics. And if those Downing Street people aren't in touch with you and I aren't in touch with them, I think that's a problem.
I agree with that. And they've got to they've got to have an understanding of how the media works and what the media wants as well, right? Which is important. But they've also got to have their respect. And, that's the single most important thing, is if you have advisors inside the machinery of Number 10 who don't carry the respect of, bluntly, people like you and people who've been around and understand how politics works, then you will always be in trouble. And I think that's one of the issues that we've had for quite some time.
Not just Starmer.
Not to do down any
I think
particular,
the Tories too.
Not just Starmer, and it's not to do down any particular individual, but we have definitely gone through a decade or so of having advisors being the story on a fairly regular basis. And I speak as an advisor who ended up in the story, right?
I think you're qualified to speak about that, Andy Coulson.
when the spokesman needs a spokesman, was the line in my own resignation statement. So, I say this with a degree of hesitation, but you get my point. We don't need profile, we need respect.
Just finally, Andy, you are very close to the Conservative Party. You've operated in the party and in government at the highest level. What do you make of the current leadership contest? Do you think the Tories will pick the right person? And who do you think that is?
I'm not close enough to it to be able to answer the question as to whether or not they're picking the right person, because I don't know the individuals. I've met Kemi once. I've never met Robert Jenrick. And on the basis, speak as you find, that's important to say. What will be interesting for me is whether or not, they're picking a leader who stands a chance of being a leader at the next election, because that is not a given. It could well be that there's another change of leadership for the Conservative Party, pre-election. That could happen. The Labour are off to a bad start, but there's nothing that I've seen that makes me think that, that they're not going to be there for quite some time yet. And so the new leader, whichever of the two it is, has got a hell of a job on their hands, because they've got to fight a war on three fronts. They've got to be an effective opposition. They've got to take on and understand the danger of the Lib Dems, which is real. Once they're in, they're very difficult to get out. and are very effective campaigners. And of course, they've got to deal with reform, and they can't deal with reform in the way that the Conservative Party has dealt with reform in a different guise through a number of years. The Tory Party has totally misjudged, mishandled, and underestimated, that risk that sat there, in my view. And so those are three really big jobs, big strategic dilemmas that will sit alongside the day job of just being an effective opposition. And of course, the most difficult thing in opposition, I spent most of my time, by the way, in opposition, a year in government after, is getting noticed, right? It's just getting noticed is a huge challenge. Because you are His Majesty's official opposition, you think you think there's going to be a kind of, by default, just an amount of coverage, an amount of kind of profile that comes with it. It's just not really the case. It's a struggle. And you're completely boxed out of the conversation for long periods during the course of the year. So being super strategic about how you maximize those opportunities when they come, as well as being super tactical about trying to carve out and find some, that's the art of opposition. And that is not just about the leader. That is about the team that he or she is going to build around them. And we just talked about, the anonymity of advisors, but let's just talk a bit about the ability of advisors, people who are really up for it, who, when there's a problem, will walk into the problem, not walk away from it, who aren't just thinking about their own political careers, which, of course, politics has got a fair few of those people. People who aren't just kind of, in it because they think they're in an episode of The West Wing, which is another disease of our system. You want people who are properly up for it. And David Cameron, my old boss, built a really very, very good team. I was lucky enough to be a member of it, but there were other very able people around David with different views, but all of them focused on one. And that, I think that's going to be the task for this next leader. Can they build a team?
Andy Coulson, thanks a lot for appearing on Planet Normal.
No, thanks for having me.
So there you go, Allison. Andy Coulson, pretty controversial figure in many ways, who has come through, in his own words, lots of dramas. I know I've talked about his podcast a lot, but it really is amazing, the selection of interviews he's got on it. And some of them are very, very moving. And I would say useful for lots of people to listen to.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it, when you have had these people who've been very prominent, people like Jonathan Aitken, and Andy, who's obviously went to jail and paid great tribute to his wife Eloise, who I've met as a fantastic woman, very strong for their three boys, and can then, bring real insight into things. I think something you and I have often said on Planet Normal is what's lacking, I think, obviously in the Conservative Party, but also on the other side now, has been the sort of Coulson element, a sort of street savvy Sun journalist who can read the public mood. And by that, the sort of the old Labour mood, or indeed the voters that Boris managed to sweep up in 2019. And I think, as Andy said, the Tories had grossly underestimated the threat from Nigel Farage and reform, hadn't they?
Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We learn so much from you, the citizens of Planet Normal.
This is from Richard. A quick note to congratulate Allison on her Telegraph column, which will go down in political history. I've no doubt her announcement that she'd be off to reform if James Cleverly won was a big factor in the surprise result in the membership ballot the next day. For all the talk about tactical voting, I don't think the numbers stack up. Team Cleverly wouldn't have wanted to face Jenrick in the final round, so they might have lent him votes, but that wouldn't explain the surge in support for Kemi. What happened, I believe, was that Tory MPs were helped by Allison's column to see the stark lunacy of choosing a continuity candidate after the biggest defeat in their party's history. Ultimately, they understood that the party needs to change. And to be fair, many of them have seen this from the outset. It has been estimated there are only 20 MPs who are really on the right. But Robert Jenrick and Kemi have always been in the lead until Cleverly rallied after a good conference speech. I now have no idea who I'll vote for, says Richard, but I'll be happy with either outcome. And I hope the new leader can work with reform to give the country a real alternative to the Starmer regime. And also on the same theme, Liam, more of our poets.
Oh my God.
This is from Steve. It's me again, says Steve. In the interest of political balance, I felt compelled to offer a limerick. Yes, here we go. On the marathon that is the Conservative Party leadership race. So here we go. Steve's limerick. And then there were two. Now that the two have been chosen and the number of contestants frozen, it's Kemi or Rob for the number one job, so preventing their party's implosion. It's strictly a dance-off debut, and they've still some impressing to do. If they fail to entice, they'll be dancing on ice up the creek and without a canoe. Although it's the members who vote, they'll tune into soundings and note which memes have more traction with multiple factions and which themes their dreams will demote. And once they have weathered the storm of public opinion and form, there'll be a new leader, the PM succeeder, while the loser is wooed by reform. Boom, boom. Very good. And also Steve adds a riddle. Question, why are Liam and Allison like the Tory party? Answer, they're both a shadow of their former selves. Thank you for the continuing sanity, even if it is only 1 hour in the woke week. Thank you, Steve, for that marvellous limerick.
This is from Richard. Lots of memories from the 70s. I was on Planet Normal from the word go. Hi, Allison and Liam. When I was a child in the late 1960s, I was a massive fan of Subbuteo table football. So was I. And was overjoyed one Christmas when my parents gave me the International Edition. One of the features of that was the inclusion of battery-operated floodlights. When the power cuts started in the 70s, we had some scheduled for the evening when I got home from school. Being a good grammar school boy, I was keen to make sure that my homework was handed in when due, so I needed to make sure it was done without resorting to the use of candlelight, which my mum thought was dangerous. Subbuteo floodlights were the perfect alternative. Now in my mid-60s, those floodlights still reside in their original box in my loft. I can't bear to part with my favourite childhood game. It looks as if they may need to see some action again, so I'll have to look them out. I'll need some of those huge square batteries though. I'm sure Ed Miliband will point me in the right direction to get some. Regards, Richard.
Do Bob.
Dear Velma and Scooby-Doo, I don't suppose there are too many people under the age of 70 who remember the 3-day working week imposed by Ted's Heath government in early 1974 to conserve coal stocks due to the National Union of Miners' demands for a 35% pay increase. All non-essential businesses were restricted to a 3-day working week, so this, at the time, lowly insurance clerk had to travel from West Ewell to Croydon, bus followed by 2 trains, to sit at a desk, often lit by candles, in an office that was nowhere near sufficiently warm to meet health and safety rules. Despite the inconvenience, we managed to have some fun, most of which would have got us all fired in these politically correct days. It's worth pointing out that the women were just as bad. Ted Heath's government would fall following a snap election in February, and surprise, surprise, the incoming Labour government immediately settled the NUM's 35 wage claim. This was followed by another 35% increase in 1975. We, on the other hand, had to be content with threshold payments where a 1% increase in inflation was matched by a 1% salary increase. This happened almost monthly, and as a result depressed and merit increases which never seemed to feature in union demands. Hopefully a few blackouts will be worth seeing the back of Ed, who hasn't got a Scooby Siliband, and his net zero nonsense. Keep the rocket of reason and right thinking pointing in the right direction. Best, Bob.
This is a big theme this week, Liam. You'll have noticed that as Keir Starmer's investment summit was launched in London, that's the same day the country's blackout prevention plan was activated. And as we've been predicting for some time, we came perilously close this week to power cuts. This is all the fault of course, Mad Ed and his blackout Britain. Now, I've written a piece this week, which will have a link in the show notes, Liam, and it's about why I am going to be buying a generator. And this is from John. As a professional geologist in oil and gas, I personally have a stash of 6 gas bottles in the garden, an LPG petrol generator, a wood-burning stove and 4 tons of wood, says John. Quite a lot in my field, says John. Expect blackouts this winter. If you think toilet paper made people go crazy during lockdowns, I dread to think how very cold people or people without charged phones will react when the power goes off. Hopefully they'll take it out on Ed the Bacon Mangler.
And finally, Allison, another poem, this time from Rhyming Simon. As a season ticket holder for the Rocket, he says, you asked for the memories of the 70s power cuts and that we'll endure once again thanks to Sick in the Head Ed. Here goes. Matches by the fireside, candles at the ready, games of Snap with Granny, 'cause there's nothing on the telly. Memories shared of blackouts, but this time there's no war. Just 3-day weeks and power cuts. That was 1974. 50 years have come and gone. Now net zero's a deal breaker. No log burning stoves or gas or coal. Oh, the damage done by a tool maker. Yes, Starmer's running out of fuel as Mad Ed pushes us all to the brink. Has anyone got 50p for the meter? 'Cause the country's on the blink. The 70s are mere memories for those of us who's old. Well, man the ramparts, light a fire. We'll fight this war against cold. If power cuts come back again, there won't be much to savour. But this time we all know who to blame. 3 cheers for Keir. It's Labour.
Very good.
And on that bombshell, Allison, that's it from Planet Normal for another week. So we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reason views. Email of the week, it's your turn.
And it's going to go to Rhyming Simon
Right.
for adding to our stock of stanzas. My God, we're going to have to publish a small downstairs lavatory book at this rate. So Simon, Rhyming Simon, please send us an email with a subject in mug winner and including your full name and address. And we will send you a rare as rocking horse poo Planet Normal mug.
And another reminder that Allison and I are staging a live recording of Planet Normal at the Battle of Ideas Festival in Westminster, central London, this coming Sunday, the 20th of October. It's an extended voyage, 90-minute Planet Normal extravaganza with 2 special guests, the academic and cultural commentator Frank Furedi and comedian and author Andrew Doyle.
That's right. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. So if you're in London or if you can get along, please come and join us. We're going to be hosted by our friends at the Battle of Ideas, led, of course, by Planet Normal legend Baroness Claire Fox. We're going to be recording at 11 a.m. on Sunday, the 20th of October. If you would like to join us, and please do, go to battleofideas.org.uk and we'll put the link in the show notes to this episode. And we should also mention that the absolutely sensational Irish music band, The Hooligans, will be...
Who are they?
Who are they? Do we know anyone who strums along, looking moody and picturesque on the guitar?
And Planet Normal listeners can get 20% off all categories of Battle of Ideas tickets if they use the code PlanetNormal24, all one word, Planet Normal, then the number 24. That's the Battle of Ideas over the weekend of Saturday the 19th and Sunday the 20th of October, with a live Planet Normal recording at 11 a.m. on the Sunday. And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal, the madness of planet Earth comes back into view. Thanks as ever to our producers, Isabel Bajard, Elliot Lampitt, Cass Ho and Louisa Wells, staying safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.